Have you ever pondered why Africa, a continent so rich in resources, became a playground for European powers in the 19th century? This question stirs curiosity about an era that marked a significant shift in global power dynamics. The colonization of Africa, a period also known as the Scramble for Africa, is a fascinating albeit complex chapter in history, one that shaped the continent and the world in profound ways. So, are you ready? Let's delve into the past and unravel the truth. Our journey begins in the year 1884, in the city of Berlin, Germany. In this year, a meeting of colossal historical significance was held, the Berlin Conference. This meeting, convened by Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, was designed to discuss the African question. This question was not about the welfare or the prosperity of Africa, but rather, it was about how 7 European nations could divide this vast continent among themselves. The Berlin Conference was attended by representatives from Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and the United Kingdom. These nations, spurred by a cocktail of Industrial Revolution-fueled ambitions, political competition, and a thirst for new markets and resources, were eager to stake their claims on Africa. The purpose of the conference was to regulate European colonization and trade in Africa during the new imperialism period. Amidst the grandeur of Berlin's halls, rules were set down for the colonization of Africa. These rules were not designed to protect or benefit the African people, but rather to prevent conflict between the European powers. To these ends, the conference established the principle of effective occupation. According to this principle, a power could only claim a territory if it had established authority there, usually through the presence of treaties, and could physically and administratively control the area. The conference also dealt with other matters, such as freedom of trade in the Congo Basin, prohibition of the slave trade, and the development of future colonization projects. Yet within these lofty discussions and grand plans, one crucial voice was missing, that of Africa itself. The African chiefs and leaders, those who truly understood the land and its people, were not invited to Berlin. Their voices were drowned out by the heavy thuds of European boots, marching towards a continent that was not theirs to take. The Berlin Conference set the stage for the scramble for Africa. It was the beginning of a tumultuous era, an era that would forever change the face of Africa and indeed, the world. The repercussions of this conference can still be felt today, echoing through the annals of history. Following the Berlin Conference, the colonization of Africa began in earnest. This era, often referred to as the Scramble for Africa, saw 7 Western European powers laying claim to vast swaths of the African continent. Their methods for establishing control were varied, yet equally impactful. Belgium, under the personal rule of King Leopold, claimed the entire Congo as a personal possession. This was a unique situation as the king did not govern on behalf of his nation, but rather as a private citizen. The exploitation and brutality under his rule led to the death and suffering of millions. France, on the other hand, had a more systematic approach. They established colonies in the west and north, including Mauritania, Senegal, Mali, Guinea, Ivory Coast, and Niger, among others. They also colonized the island nations of Madagascar and Mauritius. French rule was characterized by a policy of assimilation, where the aim was to turn the colonized into Frenchmen through education and language. Germany, Italy, Portugal, and Spain also claimed territories. Germany's colonies included Cameroon, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and Namibia. Italy laid claim to Eritrea, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Libya. Portugal colonized Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde, and São Tomé and Príncipe, while Spain took control of parts of Morocco, Western Sahara, and Equatorial Guinea. The United Kingdom, arguably the most prolific colonizer, established control over numerous territories across the continent. These included Egypt, Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, and many more. British rule was characterized by a policy of indirect rule, using local leaders to govern on their behalf. Each power had its own method of asserting control and influence over their territories. Some used force and brutality, while others used policy and administration. Regardless of the method, the impact was the same. The indigenous cultures, political structures, and economies were disrupted, often with devastating effects. By 1914, almost 90% of Africa was under European rule. This was the culmination of a rapid and comprehensive colonization process that had begun just a few decades earlier. The effects of this scramble for territory and resources are still felt in Africa today. The colonization of Africa had profound and lasting impacts. This is an undeniable truth. The European powers' scramble for Africa left indelible marks on the continent's societies, economies, and cultures. Let's consider the economic effects. The colonizers introduced new agricultural methods and crops which, in some cases, led to increased food production. They built infrastructure, roads, railways, and ports, to facilitate the transportation of goods. Mining industries were established, extracting valuable resources like gold, diamonds, and copper. However, these developments were often designed to serve the interests of the colonizers, not the local people. Economic exploitation was rampant, with profits flowing back to Europe rather than benefiting the African economies. Culturally, Africa experienced a massive upheaval. Local customs and traditions were often suppressed as the colonizers imposed their own cultural values and norms. Yet, this cultural imposition also led to a fusion of African and European cultures, resulting in new forms of music, art, and cuisine that continue to enrich the global cultural landscape. Education and healthcare systems were established, albeit primarily for the benefit of the colonizers. However, over time these systems were expanded to serve the local populations, leading to improvements in literacy rates and overall health. Yet, this did not come without a cost. Many African languages were sidelined, and access to these services was often limited, further deepening social inequalities. And then there's the societal impact. The arbitrary borders drawn by the Europeans often ignored the complex ethnic and tribal affiliations of the African people, leading to ongoing conflicts even today. But it's not all negative. The struggle against colonial rule led to the emergence of strong national identities and movements for independence that have shaped the political landscape of modern Africa. The legacy of colonization is a complex tapestry of both gains and losses. It's a tale of exploitation and growth, of cultural erosion and fusion, of societal disruption and national awakening. The legacy of colonization continues to shape Africa to this day. It's a legacy that Africa, and indeed the world, continues to grapple with, reevaluate, and learn from. The winds of change began to blow across Africa in the mid-20th century. As the world emerged from the ashes of World War II, the colonial powers were weakened, and the call for independence in Africa grew louder. The process of decolonization, a term used to describe the transition from colonial rule to sovereign nation, began to take shape. Decolonization in Africa was not a smooth process, and it varied greatly from country to country. Some nations achieved independence through peaceful negotiations, while others had to fight long and brutal wars to break free from their colonial masters. Despite the different paths to independence, each newly formed nation shared common challenges. One of the major challenges was the need for nation building. Many of the new countries lacked the necessary infrastructure, institutions, and experienced leadership to effectively govern their territories. The colonial powers had often exploited ethnic and tribal divisions to maintain control, and these divisions did not disappear with independence. These internal conflicts often led to civil strife and even civil war in some instances. Another major challenge was economic development. Colonialism had often focused on extracting resources for export to the colonial powers, leaving the new nations with economies that were underdeveloped and dependent on a single export. Diversifying these economies and developing sustainable economic growth was a significant challenge. International organizations played a crucial role in the decolonization process. The United Nations, for instance, recognized the right of all peoples to self-determination and worked to facilitate peaceful transitions to independence. The newly independent African nations also formed the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union, to promote cooperation and integration among African states. Decolonization was not an overnight process. It took decades for the majority of African nations to achieve independence, and the legacy of colonial rule is still felt today. But the end of colonization marked a new era. It was a time of hope and optimism, a time when Africans could begin to shape their own destiny. The end of colonization marked a new chapter in Africa's history. From the Berlin Conference to the end of colonization, Africa's history is a tale of exploitation, struggle, and resilience. The scramble for Africa was a period of intense and swift colonization by 7 Western European powers. These nations, driven by a thirst for resources and political power, partitioned most of the African continent among themselves. We journeyed through the Berlin Conference of 1884, where Otto von Bismarck convened 7 European nations to discuss the African issue. This conference became an emblem of the scramble, dividing Africa into spheres of influence for Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and the United Kingdom. As we delved into the colonization period, we uncovered the vast territories claimed by each European power, from France's hold on Mauritania, Senegal, and Mali, among others, to the United Kingdom's rule over Egypt, Libya, and Sudan, to name a few. We explored the impacts of colonization, from cultural erasure to economic exploitation, and the enduring effects still felt today. Finally, we ventured into the end of colonization, a period marked by national liberation movements and the reclamation of sovereignty. Yet, even as the colonial powers receded, their influence lingered, shaping Africa's post-colonial trajectory. As we reflect on this period in history, we must ask ourselves, was the colonization of Africa justified, and what lessons can we learn from it? This is not just a question of historical curiosity, but a crucial inquiry for our present and future. Let's continue this dialogue, and remember, always share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching.